Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another weather forecast here in Tropical Discussion by Adrian's Weather Forecast. And we're having another update here on Major Hurricane Larry as it is continuing to look like a very intimidating hurricane. We have a lot of updates overall with the overall peak strength and just overall track as well. So let's go ahead and jump into the video. So here's a look here at the latest National Hurricane Center advisory. So Larry here at 125 miles an hour, and pressure's gradually decreasing at a lot of a slower rate. So it looks like this whole rapid intensification and bombogenesis is slowing down. Actually, it looks like it's done strengthening for the rest of its life here. The National Hurricane Center no longer has this getting to a Category 4 peak and has it staying at a 125-mile-an-hour peak here. So that's definitely very interesting, and I'll explain the reasoning for that later on in the video. But minimal pressure is now at 955 millibars, and it's now starting to go northwest instead of west-northwestward. So it's starting to do its gradual turn here as a result of the ridge steering as well as a trough in the eastern United States here, keeping the storm from going anywhere west of Bermuda here, any west, just slightly east of Bermuda. So that's why it's starting to go at a northwestern pace. Discussion here again, they only want a 125-mile peak here, and they don't have it getting any weaker than 125 till the next 48 hours. So we're gonna be looking at overall at a 125-mile storm for quite a few days. So the key message here: large swells generated by Larry are expected to reach the Lesser Antilles today and will spread to portions of the Greater Antilles, the Bahamas, and Bermuda on Monday and Tuesday. Significant swells will likely reach the east coast of the United States and the Atlantic Canada by midweek. So we're also going to still see some swells and overall nasty water conditions, even areas far 100 miles or a few hundred miles away from the actual storm itself. These swells will likely cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. And obviously, just keeping a close eye on just follow advice basically from lifeguards and local officials, because although it may not be anywhere close to the United States, we're still going to be seeing, considering this is a large Category 3 hurricane, still going to be seeing significant effects water-wise within the rip current specifically, all the way up into the east coast of the United States and portions of the Greater Antilles. Larry is forecasted to approach Bermuda during the next several days, likely as a major hurricane, bringing a risk of strong winds, heavy rainfall, and coastal flooding to the island by the middle of this week here. While it is too soon to determine whether the magnitude of these hazards and potential impacts on Bermuda interests, there should closely monitor the latest forecast updates. So that's why there are no watches or warnings, anything like that for Bermuda just yet because of the uncertainty. So let's go ahead and look at the overall discussion part now. So we're seeing cloud tops near negative 80 degrees Celsius. There are, however, some breaks in the cold tops over the northern portion of the circulation. The current intensity is adjusted slightly to 110 knots based on the blend of subjective Dovrak estimates. Upper level inflow remains somewhat restricted over the southwestern quadrant. It's obviously because, like I was talking about earlier, there was some dry air limiting that as well, indicative of less slight vertical shear. This shear is probably being caused by the flow to the east of an upper level low to the north of Puerto Rico. The low is forecasted to move northwestward over the next few days, possibly lessening the shear over Larry. So basically, it's kind of the reasoning for its trend in its weakening, or at least its weakening in the peak itself there because of the overall conditions. As well, there's going to be some dry air becoming a threat toward Larry itself. But let's not go ahead and get to the actual look at the system itself. So here's a look at the Hurricane Larry, the IR forecast. You can see this is overall a pretty strong storm here. We are seeing a pretty large clear eye with positive convection there of around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. So it's obviously a pretty intense storm considering the amount of positive convection we are seeing there as well with the system. It looks like the eye is definitely reducing in its size as a result of the latest convection burst to the west here. So it looks like we are starting to see possibly a chance of an eye wall replacement cycle within Larry, as it looks like we're having a second developing eye wall on the western quadrant. So it looks like that Larry had a chance, and it looks like it's going through an eye wall replacement cycle, and that's why the eye of the storm is actually reducing its size there. And we do have a few mesovorts there. We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we actually have a polygonal eye shape here, and we are seeing basically a mean 5 mesovorts within the actual eye wall itself here, or the inner eye wall itself. Overall, outflow channels are being again limited into the south and west quadrant because of the overall condition in that part. But overall, again, we are seeing some convection there, getting up to around negative 72, anywhere to as high as negative 80 degrees Celsius cloud tops. Let's take a look at the visible in this room. Obviously, it looks a lot more intimidating once you look into visible. Really seeing a nice clear eye there with a lot of those sires and cumulus cell rapidly spinning around it. But it looks like this convection is starting to eat up the actual eye itself. That's why it's reducing in size. But obviously, in the actual satellite, it looks like there is no eye because of the latest convection burst covering the eye itself. But there is still an eye in an area of pretty large area of positive convection with no initiation or storms going on. And that's how we know there's still an eye. But overall, look at this really strong outflow there. It's a really strong outflow of those divergent cloud or divergent clockwise cloud tops. I don't know why I could not get that out of my mouth. Holy cow! What I meant to say, basically in summary, these are really strong outflow channels. We're basically seeing around 2 outflow channels basically within this, and then that really strong inflow, causing that strict boundary between the outer bands and the actual eyewall itself. But we're seeing that divergent clockwise flow within the Cyrus cloud, showing you we are seeing an upper low anticyclone within this storm here. But there is a little bit of dry air limiting any outflow channels within the southwest quadrant. You can actually tell there is in dry air by the wavy cloud toss we're seeing to the actual west itself here. You can clearly see that's where we're seeing that dry air right here. And you can kind of see a little bit of dry air even down here. So that's why we are seeing a little bit limitation there of any initiation or convection in the southwest quadrant. We're also seeing a little bit of dry air actually within this eye as itself. You can actually see some pretty intense dry air in the actual eye. So that is also going to be a factor to it. It's no longer strengthening here. So although this dry air is obviously still in place, it's not going to most likely hurt this storm. And it still has a rather strong CDO there, an intense eye wall with a good amount of overall evaporation and precipitation overall. So that's a really good storm looking right now. However, like I did say, there is a little bit of lacking here in the southwest quadrant. And that's going to be something to keep a close eye on, because if this does continue to lack with moisture, then this dry air coming from the south or coming from the northwest will be a pretty big threat toward the system. And that's most likely, again, another reason why they did decrease the peak here to still 125 instead of 145. So it looks like I was in the very, very beginning when I said this would most likely be a Paulette storm, which was, I believe, 115. Looks like I was pretty darn accurate because obviously Epsilon, I think Paulette, no, hold on, I think Paulette, no, Paulette was 105 and Epsilon was 115. So it's probably more of an Epsilon system. Actually, I'm really confused. I think, I can't remember which one was actually major. I think it was Epsilon that was 115. But all I know is that Teddy was 140, and it looks like it was going to become a Teddy 2.0, but obviously, as the dry air is becoming a threat here, that's going to be a big reason to why why there is a decrease in the peak. So here's that look here at the overall 5-day tropical weather forecast here for Hurricane Larry. Obviously, quite symmetrical still. Going to continue to become a major hurricane as basically as long as Wednesday there, and then obviously it weakens to a Category 2 as it goes into more less conducive environment. Bermuda is no longer the actual edge of the cone, so there actually has been a little bit of an eastern shift here, and that's going to obviously be really good news for Bermuda, because if it's this far away from Bermuda, this far east of Bermuda, and so it's on a weakening trend, Bermuda actually may not get as much as we thought it was going to get originally, so we actually may not even get tropospheric watches. It just depends here. Here, look at the overall tropospheric force winds timing wise. So, going to watch out for Bermuda within around Wednesday evening here. Going to have a 30 to 40 to a 40 to 50% basically. So, still rather on the lower end, but still keeping a really close eye on Bermuda. So, here's now look at the overall Saharan air layer. And again, there is some intense dry air just to the west of the system. Obviously, a large upper low anticyclone, and overall again obviously moisture bubble and obviously tropical wave is protecting this storm here, but there is a little bit of dry air within the middle of the actual eye itself of like we mentioned there is some intense dry air going within the actual eye itself. So there is dry air. That is a reasoning for this storm looking the way it is. It's kind of going a little bit of a downtrend here. There is dry air to the west. There is dry air in the actual storm itself. That's why this storm's really not looking the best right now. Kind of convection's covering the storm. The eye is kind of losing its shape, and it's kind of just becoming distorted. So overall, this storm's kind of looking like it's falling apart a little bit. Only really good thing about this storm's strength and why it's going to keep its very similar 125 miles an hour peak, even though it's kind of seeing some dry air, is because some really good ocean heat concepts and to really help the storm kind of get its act together once again. Going to be moving some areas of over 75 meters of 80 degrees plus Fahrenheit. We have some scattered areas of over 90. So overall, there is going to be a little bit on the good side for this system. Also, obviously, dry air is not, or obviously warm water isn't everything, but that's going to be one factor to why this storm is going to keep its overall heat strength. Obviously, not going. It's not going to keep weakening, at least as of now, as we think. Even there is still some very intense dry air, but again, another factor to why it's most likely going to keep its strength it is now, not weaken furthermore, at least for the next 48 hours, is going to be as well because as the upper level shear starts to decrease, so we're going to be seeing a little bit less threat of the vortex kind of tilting, allowing for overall just the storm falling apart and these overall storms just getting sheared apart. So that's going to be another big factor to why the storm's most likely not going to weaken furthermore to the next few days. Let's take a look at the overall 12D GFS, and they're a little bit less behind than they were yesterday. They have it now at 966. Obviously, it's still around 11 millibars off, but it's. I mean, again, at this point, malls are kind of just really useless to kind of use because we kind of have an overall idea of what's going to happen. You kind of see a little bit more of an eastern shift here. GFS is a lot less closer to Bermuda than it was the past few days. I mean, Bermuda looks like it was going to get directly hit if the GFS was continuing its western trend. But now it's going a little bit on an eastern trend, just like the symbols, and as we'll do overall members are forecasting as well. So Bermuda most likely will dodge a bullet a lot more than we thought it would. It was going to be very close originally, but thankfully, not only will this be Category 2 when it passes, but it's going to be a lot further east. So Bermuda actually may not get really anything, not even flooding actually. CMC as well still pretty far behind. They're basically 40 millibars behind. The Icon's pretty behind as well. But the Icon still really wants this storm to get really crazy strong at 946 millibars. I think the Icon's definitely under forecasting the overall less conducive environment here. That's definitely quite interesting here. But yeah, they really have kind of an overall good environment and really anything to worry about according to the Icon. Not even dry air. But yeah, that's what the Icon has for us. So that's obviously very interesting. That's what the Europeans showing a really intense. Vorticity 12 just came out right now, and as well the European doing a really far eastern shift as well. Let's take a look here what the GFS is showing here vorticity wise. They're also going quite mental with this really strong storm there with the large extreme vorticity allowing for that really strong shear to develop on the overall areas around the actual low pressure itself because of strong spin and inflow and outflow there channels. So obviously we're gonna be seeing a good amount of shear there developing there across the actual low pressure, but it's not gonna be to the point where it actually weakens the storm itself. Actually, will keep regenerating its actual spin and strength, so it's gonna actually help the storm itself. But again, gonna be a pretty intense storm for sure. Let's take a look at the overall shear here, because obviously it's gonna be a pretty big factor to steering. So there's the overall. We have a trough down here. So there's the actual. I think this is another trough right here. So you kind of have, it's basically what's going on. So there's the ridge right up here. This is obviously going to keep this storm from going anywhere westward, because we're going to be seeing a really strong kind of dip in the jet stream right there, and that's going to produce a little bit decent amount of upper level shear of around 40 to 50 knots. Again, like I did say, there is going to be some good amount of shear developing on the outside of Larry because of the strong vorticity, but that's obviously not going to weaken the storm. That's going to keep regenerating it. But they're seeing a really strong upper level anticyclone with looks like about 2 outflow channels. Again, this storm's going to kind of just look a lot less intimidating as we continue to go on. And then looks like we have a few more channels. So we have around 3 upper level anticyclone outflow channels now. That's going to keep the storm really at any risk of dry air. But there's a trough right here that's going to keep the storm from going anywhere to the United States or even Bermuda. It's obviously going to push a storm and it's actually then it's obviously then going to turn into a really strong ridge north of the axis, and that's obviously going to kind of pick the storm up as well. You can kind of just completely going around the system. So it's obviously going to kind of just push it just like that, and you're going to see it as we continue to go on and on. There, see, it basically directly follows that arrow I just drew.